Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance, and talk about how things really work. Welcome to KIMEcast. Tony Mikla, Evan Hauger, Russ Downing, Aaron Crouch. Good to be back with you guys. So we're going to take on tissue adaptation here as our topic for tonight, and I think it's from a mechanical standpoint, this is what we do. You know, when you talk about sports medicine or training or performance enhancement or PT or whatever, for that matter, even orthopedic surgery, it's about tissue adaptation and tissue healing, and really understanding that and understanding how to challenge tissue so that it adapts and changes. And that's what we all love. That's what we're all passionate about, is how the body adapts and changes. It's really amazing. I mean, that makes it the most incredible machine on the planet, in my opinion. So we're gonna talk about that and ways that we influence it, some programming around that as we go through the evening here. So, but Evan, what are we drinking here for the beer of the night?
All right, we are drinking. This is the Lazy Hazy. It's from Fall River Brewing in beautiful Redding, California.
Nice. Oh, good for them.
Good for them.
Evan,
a brewery in Redding.
Up there, right?
I did, yeah.
Nice.
Shasta College.
Figured you called it beautiful.
Shasta Nights.
Oh, Shasta Nights.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
It almost sounds
That's
like
all there is to say about it.
a
Yeah.
festival almost. It's not. All right. Anyway.
Oh boy, Aaron.
Yeah.
Gotta work on your leads here.
Yeah, they're not good. It's okay.
The content is there.
It's a good spot up north there in Reading, I have to say. So, all right, let's tissue adaptation. So let's get this rolling.
Perfect. Tissue. Which tissue? I think that's a key point to all of this business. Which tissue? So when you're injured, what's injured? This is where imaging, I think, is helpful. But understanding between fascia, tendon, ligament, bone, muscle belly, muscle itself, the brain, the nervous system, you have to know the tissue. Then we can really adapt or understand how to influence it to adapt.
I think we kind of get stuck into, like, we think of coming out of school maybe as PTs that you're influencing the musculoskeletal system only. But I mean, you said one perfectly as like nervous system. Like, we can have neuro fatigue and maybe call it something else. We could have an influence on their motor pattern, and that's completely neurological. But you can't leave it out. But there's so much knowledge you need to know at a foundational level of, like, identifying the tissue you're working with first, and then really knowing, like, the different timelines of what to expect of the adaptation of that tissue. And that's what we can hit that in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Could we almost go through this right now, just taking the continuums, like start at the far left side of the continuum, and how do we influence tissue there, and then work our way to the right? It just came to me.
Just wow, that's
Genius.
fantastic.
Yeah, so I mean, I think to Aaron's point, we can talk about tissue healing, which is a form of adaptation for sure, and I think fundamental in the process of, well, certainly of training, but obviously of injury recovery as well as an obvious point. So let's just talk about some of the different tissues like Russ threw out there. So you've heard this idea about bone, that sometimes it's better to break a bone than strain a muscle or pull a muscle. And the reason why that's said, and the reason why that comment is made, is that bone takes roughly 6 to 8 weeks. 8 weeks is kind of the general time frame for it to heal. You know, so then you should be asking that question: what does that mean? What does it mean for it to heal? But certainly for it to stabilize and develop this strong kind of trellis formation where it comes back together and becomes solid, that's going to happen by about the 8-week mark for the most part. And of course, it's going to mature and it's going to adapt over several months beyond that point. But we see that it's really quite solid at that moment. That's why you see someone in a cast for 4 weeks or 6 weeks, is to give it enough time for it to stabilize. But once that bone's solid, then that's exactly what it is. It's pretty solid.
Now, Dr. Mikla, that seems so fast. Why is that so fast?
Because it has the best blood flow of all the tissues.
That's right. So when it comes to the PT land, if you break the middle of your bone, you probably don't need that much PT. It's really an easy heal. It's out of all the injuries we deal with, like, oh, I broke my bone. That's the easiest thing out there. Now, if it's close to a joint, now we're talking different tissues. But if it's purely bone, it's not that difficult because it heals. It has such a great blood supply for most people. And then I think that goes back to blood supply, good, unless we've got some other comorbidities that affect your blood health. But bone's pretty simple and pretty standard. And you can have repeat x-rays to document it. You get the little cell called an osteoclast that breaks it down. You get a little osteoblast in it that builds it up. And over the course of a fracture, you see that bone fill in through the x-ray. And it's really a wonderful thing. It's really quite simple.
Yep. That's where the rest of this takes a lot longer than bone, and it's all like, if all tissue had a good blood supply like bone did, then we really would probably be out of a job. We'd be a minor league strength coach in the form of like, hey, let's teach you how to do some strength, and then you're going to go do some heavy weights over there. But the knowledge of the healing process is critical, and if we had better blood supplies to tendons, to cartilage, people wouldn't need as much help as we provide. So those are the big components would be cartilage injury or cartilage healing, as well as tendon healing. Both of them are quite slow. So you're seeing numbers here in like the 10 to 14 week categories. Yeah. So that's 3 months of healing to be in this, using healing as the same form that we used it in bone, that the structure becomes solid, it becomes engaged, and it's not going to just pull apart. That's 3 months. That's a tremendous time frame and really difficult. And that's where you see people that are, in some sort of immobilizer brace for 6 weeks and then on crutches for a few more weeks, and you kind of drag the process out. So the reason why that's happening is the healing rate is slow. Now, when we see them early on in this process, our goal is really to increase blood flow, increase circulation, because the better blood flow we get, the better the healing is, the more solid the recovery can be. And then, of course, when you're dealing with a 3-month rehab process on an injured tissue, if you're just resting for 3 months, now that muscle tissue that on your other leg that was healthy, or in your core or in your upper extremity or whatever that was healthy, is now going to be atrophying during that period because you're not using it as much. We've got a client right now, a CHP officer, and this is always the debate we have with like work comp issues, and they've been phenomenal for him, I have to say. But he's only he had a tibial fracture, and he's only about 4 weeks out now, coming up on his 5th week out, and he's able to weight bear and such on it, and he's moving really quite well. But the doctor told him, now be careful, don't go out and about and doing other things out in the world, because you could be seen as a negative thing, that you could go to work and do light duty and such. And he's like, well, I could go do light duty, but that means I'm not going to be doing my rehab. And I've got him in the gym where he's doing stuff on the bike, he's doing core work, he's doing upper body work, he's doing a pretty good amount of leg work, even despite the fracture, all to keep him healthy, because at the end of the day, a CHP officer or a police officer is an athlete. And it'd be one thing if we let him rest for 8 weeks. Sure, the bone would heal, he'd be all right, we'd do a little strength and he'd be okay. But to go back into an athletic performance event in a week or 2 weeks, and especially when you're in a squad car, then you got to get out and chase somebody, which is how he got hurt in the first place. You're just asking for problems, and the whole body becomes deconditioned. So this whole balance of tissue healing and then conditioning the system to rise to the occasion.
And that's really about mitigating collateral damage, right? Like mitigating the effect on the rest of the body. And so we have some tools that we use, I think, really effectively for that, like blood flow restriction, which I think we talked about on another podcast, but turns into a great way to encourage a tissue adaptation at a very low load to tissues that maybe aren't ready for those higher strain rates.
Right. I think a key element there that most people get the they get the knowledge set, or they get the instruction from maybe their physician or a surgeon, whoever it is, but they say this is your tissue timeline of healing. You get like 6 to 8 weeks to let this bone heal. You get 6 to 8 weeks to let this tendon heal, or this ligament heal, or whatever it is. Once you get to that time frame, things just get started. Like, you just allowed an initial tissue bed to lay down and exist. Now it's our job to train the tissue to be resilient against the forces it's going to experience in life or sport, and to develop probably the atrophied areas that we couldn't help change a whole heck of a lot just to allow healing. So I think there's a huge misconception of like, oh yeah, this is only an 8-week process. Like, nah, not necessarily. This is a let yourself heal and then the work begins.
You use the best word, resilient. Or another word that we use often is bulletproof. And to remind everyone, our bodies are quite elastic. Bone actually has a recoil. Bone is elastic, just has a much higher elastic modulus. Tendons have a really intense recoil, so they stretch quite a bit, and then they harness that energy and bring it back. Ligaments don't stretch as much. Maybe ligaments only stretch maybe 2% strain. Tendons might have upwards of 4 to 6 to 7 to 8% strain before they recoil. Nonetheless, we need elasticity, or else we get brittle. Brittle pieces of our body break again. So when people have an injury, they are 10 times more likely to be re-injured again. And part of that resiliency and becoming bulletproof is to stress the tissue to become like it was before. That's rehab. Yeah. So You know, I think as therapists, we tend not to use the word heal because it lacks good meaning. We say, are you ready for sport? Are you ready for action? Are you ready to get back to work? Are you ready to hike Mount Talac? You know, we focus on the goal because that has some clarity to it, because now we need to stress the tissue for it to go through many iterations of stress, recover, which leads to stress adaptation to be able to do something that you couldn't do because of the injury, or maybe you got injured doing in the first place. But the big part of this healing, it does kind of like lack a little bit. I think healing maybe talks about the cross bridges that allow it to be stable under some stress, but the adaptation it takes to do something great, whole different game plan, and that takes months, if not upwards of 6 to 12 months, or even a year after some aggressive surgeries or really aggressive injuries.
Yeah.
So as we look at that's kind of tissue healing is some aspect to look at from those specific tissues: bone, cartilage, tendon. We didn't really speak about muscle itself. If you have a mid-belly muscle strain, you have a tremendous amount of blood supply there, so usually this heals up quite rapidly. You should be recovering from that within a 2-month window, so kind of that 4 to 8 week window typically, depending on how large it was or how big the strain it was. That's if it's a true in the muscle belly, because there's when you see you hurt yourself and there's a bruise, that's actually a good sign, because that means there was blood there, right? And that means that there's fresh blood coming in, and the healing rate will be much higher. Another tissue that we didn't really speak of, we talked much about cartilage, but ligament would kind of be in the same category, as it has a fair blood supply, and it really depends on the ligament in the body that you're stressing. Some have better ones than others. Some have the ability to heal up and stabilize, and some do not. So that's highly variable as well. But if it nonetheless, it's going to be on that kind of 12-week, 3-month type of timeline for that to I would say heal or stabilize. The ligaments aren't going to come back to what they once were. So if you strain it, you've strained it, and it's just going to kind of scar down as it is. So that's the difficult thing there. It's not going to recoil back like a tendon or a muscle tissue or a bone will actually evolve and change. And with ligaments, we don't see that same type of process. It tends to be is what it is. So that's why you see so much surgery on ligament reconstruction, is once it's stressed, it kind of has to be replaced or grafted essentially to fix it. Not to say there's other soft tissues that can support, but something certainly to be aware of. But in this light of tissue adaptation, I mean, this is what we do, is every day someone comes in and we ask ourselves, how much stress can this person tolerate? How much can I stress this tissue to get an adaptation response? Yeah. And so that depends on the phase. To Evan's point here is where we're at in this continuum of, if they're in an inflammatory or painful phase, then they probably aren't going to tolerate very much stress at all. They're already being stressed, just surviving. So we've got to calm that down and get that going. But then the next phase there would be to start to implement some stress to the tissue once it's out of the painful level, or it's decreasing its painful level. Let's start to stress it, and let's get it to adapt. And this has been very, very well documented about what's going on at a cellular level here when you stress and adapt tissue, and the map is quite clear. There's always variance from person to person, but essentially you're going to stress tissue progressively over time, and as you stress the tissue, you some degree break it down, you challenge it, and you're going to get a negative response at first, where you're going to get some soreness and some aches and pains and some irritation, but then you want to get an adaptation where it's like you tell the brain, like, hey, you're not strong enough, I need it to be stronger. So you demand it to move, and when you demand it to move, the brain's like, wow, that's a lot, I'm not ready for that. So then it says, okay, it's sore for a bit, but then it starts growing and developing new tissue. So the next time you come into that activity, it's a little bit thicker than it was before, it can tolerate a bit more, and then that just is continuously climbing, right? So that's stress and adaptation, and the rate at which that happens is what gets fun. That's what's really creative, and that's what really makes a great coach or a great clinician, is to understand how fast can I manipulate it. And frankly, it's person to person variable. Yeah. That's what's difficult about it.
And really, what are we manipulating, right? So you're going down the strength side of this thing. We could really go down a mobility side of this thing too. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about influencing tissue, we could be talking about influencing mobility or the tone in tissue, or we could be talking about strength. Since we're on strength, we got to decide what's creating the adaptation. There's really two versions of this. It's the structural version of things, and it's the neurological version of things. And when we look at adaptation over time, the first adaptations we see really aren't a structural change. It's making a true change in their strength. Or, I mean, hypertrophy changes are months down the road, weeks and months down the road, but you can make a neurological change in the moment. So a lot of the strength changes you see early on is a change in the nervous system, not the tissue itself.
But I think it's shorter lived too. So I think that's where we maybe fall victim to seeing the improvements in PT.
Yeah,
like you
totally.
see those quick changes, you're like, oh sweet, we did our job, we got stronger, and you can face the forces of the earth, And I think that they're going to fall off the train on their commitment level when they leave your care, and those quicker changes that were made off of the neurological side of things, they're going to be shorter lived. I think about like an ACL rehab, or any type of injury that's kind of made you compensate through your legs, and maybe you have a thigh size that's a little bit different than a stronger side. When you plant your foot on the ground when you walk, that's at least 1 to 2 times your body weight going through your thigh, or at least your entire lower extremity. When you run, that's like 7 to 10 times the amount. So it's not a neurological change that's going to give you the resilience against, say, someone that wants to get back into 5Ks and 10Ks, far beyond seeing you for the 6 to 8 weeks of time that you maybe saw them. You're going to need to create an actual structural change in their body to tolerate that for a long period of time and have some long-lasting effects. And I think that's where the PT kind of becomes in a little bit of an unknown area, because you got to know what that feels like, you got to know what it looks like, and you got to know certainly what type of commitment level it has to take to be able to get to that point.
So you speak to 3 things I like to kind of like slow down a little bit and really kind of articulate. So we have a first and foremost of a neural adaptation. When you start patterning in a new way, you learn to activate your body better. Okay, so that's a neural adaptation. Think of it as the newbie really only knows how to activate 30% of that muscle system that allows them to move in that pattern. And as you do it over and over, you learn how to use 50%. 60%, 75% of what you actually have. So really the neural adaptation is better synergy through all of the muscles that allow you to move in that pattern. Then you do that repeatedly. That has a law of diminishing returns. You start getting into a little bit of a plateau there. And with repeat bouts of stress, you then get hypertrophy. So the hypertrophy, the body says, let's increase this muscular size to allow for more contraction force. That's going to be 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks of a fair amount of repetition, much more so than what they're used to. It's going to come with some soreness. It's going to come with more enhanced nutrition to allow for that hypertrophy phase. And sadly, the lowest one on the totem pole that's really the slowest to adapt is the tendons. And the tendon to handle that elastic energy and handle it healthy without being inflamed and being stable. And that adaptation, because of a weaker blood supply, is so much slower. And whether or not the tendon gets a little bit bigger or a little bit more dense, or maybe it just has stronger fibers in and of itself, is still kind of left to research to figure that part out. It's hard to know, but we know it takes a while.
But I think the point that both of you guys are driving home here is, so there's this order of how these things come about, and the neurological change happens quick, and that's when the PT's like, all right, party trick done, your pattern is different, you're good, see you later. But they miss that long-term development point. And I think for myself at least, one of the biggest learning experiences or biggest things that I took away from outside of school learning was learning from the strength and conditioning community, and learning about how we truly change tissue, because I didn't get that in school. So I had to go to, we had to go to the strength and conditioning community to learn how to actually create tissue adaptation over time. And then you said that tendons take longer, and so then that leads us down into the later part of our continuum and like rate of force development, because that's where that becomes important, that stretch shortening cycle for plyometric activities and speed and moving quickly.
That's it. That's why this shit takes a long time.
Yeah.
You gotta get some micro and macro periodization. If you want to do something phenomenal with your body, you got to be patient. You got to get in the reps. You have to sleep. You have to do all the things that we've talked about in so many ways to allow for the adaptation to occur.
And there's an order to it, and there's no shortcut.
Yeah, and I think that's huge. I think from a communication standpoint to a patient, especially one that's suffering from maybe more of a chronic tendon issue, right? That's been maybe pre-existing for any given period of time. From my own personal experience, just so that it's somewhat relatable, I had been injured my left patellar tendon in college. It had really kind of plagued me for quite some time. Never really felt great with squats, never really felt great with a variety of different lower body patterns. Able to tolerate running, but either way, after a long period of time, the soreness and the discomfort finally went away with physical activity. And then just a couple years ago, I was playing some men's league basketball, unfortunately. And
Unfortunately.
it was fun. Unfortunately for me that I hurt myself, I couldn't play anymore, at least for the last couple of games. But we came down the court, and I was, coming down the court, and my foot kind of like slipped as I was coming to a stop, and so it did one of those doo-doo. And on the second sticking point, I mean the bottom of the sole stuck to the hardwood, and then all my force went into my left knee. And I don't feel like I fully resolved the tendon back when I initially injured it, and so it flared up pretty bad then. I mean, to the point where like I was asking some people to do some stuff for me with the patients and like training groups that I had at that period of time, just because it was so inflamed. Through my process and knowing that it was an old chronic injury of the mid belly of the patellar tendon, I knew it was going to be a long time. And for how long, I mean, it's hard to say. It's based on the individual, based on the severity of the injury. It doesn't really matter, but you can basically count on it being months being a tendon issue because of the lack of blood supply, its ability to have to act like a fresh rubber band where it stretches and recoils constantly for speed of contraction or even force. And so in my own methodology, I use BFR constantly because it was a low threshold exercise that I could actually do without incredible amounts of pain and stimulate some growth and some hormone in the body to facilitate healing. And then after that, slow tempo work to develop some aerobic capacity within the local tissue, and then lots and lots of reps under low threshold. You got to get some hypertrophy, and then finally some strength, and then eventually back to jumping, running, cutting, and everything else. That was the better part of about 8 months. For me personally, 8 months. So, but I think those experiences are valuable. I'm not telling anyone to go hurt themselves, but I think there's some value there. Do it in a constructive way. But I think I can speak to those things, and that's happened like a couple times in my body, and for a variety of things. I think there's value to being able to kind of relate to that experience, because someone comes in with a patellar tendon issue, and they're a young athlete, and they're pushing themselves. I'm like, well, it's gonna be slow because you're gonna keep doing what you want to do, and you just have to recognize that. I mean, you're probably not going to hurt that much more. You're just going to aggravate it every so often, and these are the things you need to do, and you just kind of need to be patient because the adaptation phase is so damn slow.
And that brings up a perfect point. We said this already earlier, but I think before we were recording, but all of our clinicians we have go through the Strong First kettlebell certification, which is a pretty intense certification that requires a significant amount of training. And I know for Aaron and I, this was the better part of a year to get prepared for this thing. And I think you've said the same thing.
About a year.
About a year, right?
I felt like I was already strong too. Still took a year.
Right. Yeah, like
you were stiff, I was weak, and Evan was unstable.
And I was unstable. I'm unstable just somewhere else now. Just kidding. So, but I think the point I'm trying to make here is what I think we want clinicians to get out of that is exactly this whole idea of tissue adaptation, is that this takes time. Like training for something hard like this is not just a neurological change that's going to make you snatch 54 pounds over your head 100 times in 5 minutes, right? There's some actual true tissue changes and tissue adaptations that have to go on, and it's going to take time.
They reference training age for a reason.
So this is getting a little depressing, because now I'm thinking that the listener is going to say, "What? You're saying that this like Achilles injury is going to take a year?" There are other tissues in the body that actually heal quite fast. Yeah. So when we think of like vascular, what's the most vascular part of our body? And that'd be the heart. And the heart is really adaptive. And I think the coolest thing about all of our patients is we really kind of preach getting into some low-level, easy, simple cardio kind of really off in the beginning, whether it's on a bike, whether it's on an elliptical, whether it's going for a walk, but getting your heart rate up and down, up and down, up and down. And what we find is as you start challenging the cardiovascular system more, whether it's lactic aerobic work, that'll be a separate podcast to go over that one. Or just like strict aerobic work, maybe undulating interval aerobic work, but the heart responds really fast, and we get an upregulation of mitochondria at the heart level. The heart gets better at coming up and coming down, so we get a separation. Again, other podcast. We get a separation in your heart rate, and you get an awesome response, an awesome adaptation at the heart level that helps with regeneration across the board. So, because I think if we talk about tendons and how long it takes, it does take a while. It could take a year, could take 2, and muscles might take 30 to 45 days, but the heart responds pretty quick, and I think that's one saving grace for the human body, to be honest.
Yeah, let's just speak a bit to programming here, to kind of put the other end of the spectrum on this, to say like, okay, let's talk about some injuries and rehab things, and definitely should be constructively injured. I think that's certainly a take-home point. A take-home point, yeah. That's what, if you want to become clinician, like a PT or a chiro, that is required.
Hurt
so
yourself.
you know,
Don't we have a podcast
do
on
that.
that? Exactly. Didn't we talk about
yeah,
that?
that's
on
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our own experiences. That's not a recommendation by us. You could do that on your own accord, but that does seem to be a common thread. But but to get past the injury part and start talking about performance enhancement side of things, there is so much out there on this concept of periodization and strength conditioning and what methodology you're using in strength conditioning. And at the end of the day, what all of that conversation is about is tissue adaptation. So it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish and when you're trying to accomplish it. We would always say there's no bad exercise. There's no bad program. It just depends on what you're trying to do. You know, and if you're trying to be a runner, if you're trying to be a football player, and if you're trying to be a running back versus offensive line, those are different types of programs, different types of bodies, different types of muscle development that you want to achieve. So you have to consider all that into play. But what we do know that's fairly consistent across the spectrum is as you're training, there's a stress and an adaptation balance. And there's fairly consistent metrics that are fairly standardized that a body can tolerate training with consistent kind of load increases and increased challenge over a period of time. And that period of time is generally accepted to be about 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 6 to 10 weeks, depending on the body type and the person's training age, how long they've been doing this work and they're used to it. And then there seems to be a really preferred break period of maybe a week to 10 days to say, okay, we've been going hard for 8 weeks, let's take some time off, give it a week or so off, which might mean just decreasing the intensity, or it doesn't mean complete rest. It might be just some variety there. But it's a change on that, and then that allows the body to heal, to adapt. And then oftentimes we see the body have this response that's greater than it's been before. So this personal best that it's accomplished after that period. And so that's a standard periodization. We call it a supercompensation curve, where you stress the body to a certain point, and then you basically give it a chance to fail and recover, or give it a week or so, 10 days off, and then it bounces back and becomes better than it was because you give the body a chance to truly adapt. So you're allowing for this adaptation curve. Now, that curve is different in every person, and depending on a super variety of things, from stress to nutrition to sleep, to the time of their age and everything else, the time of their sport, what they're trying to accomplish. So lots of considerations we made there by the professional coach and such, but it's an important concept to understand that we want to stress the body over time progressively, give it a chance to recover, and then get this bigger benefit. And you see this is what's really fun, and especially in the Olympic sports, you see it tremendously. And you see it in sports that are more specific to specific events. I think you might see it in baseball and stuff as well, or you'll see it in more sports now where it's becoming more obvious, where coaches are resting guys or they're not playing guys at certain times of the year. Or
The load management concept.
Yeah,
they're talking about in the NBA all the time now.
Exactly. They're managing load all the time. And the reason they're doing that is because they're looking at this curve and they're seeing, like, well, I've been stressing this guy for a consistent 2-3 months. I've got to give him a break period or he's going to break. So that's why you see those things. And we know this with the data and statistics that we've seen. This is the metrics that's going on in sports. And if you're not aware of it, from the MLS to the NBA to the NFL, everyone's wearing GPS sensors and monitors and accelerometers. And the data that we know about these athletes is how many times they go right versus how many times they go left, at what velocities they go right versus what they go left, and then total number of volume of that over the course of a day, over the course of a week, over the course of a month, and then we tie that to injury rates. And that's what these guys are looking at, you know? So it's really incredible. But to the topic here is stress, adaptation, give it a chance to respond. What you see is that the Olympic sports is really cool. I think that, I don't know if you will recognize this, but if you watch the Olympics or like a world championship meet, guys set the Olympic record or they set their personal best at the Olympics. Mm-hmm. All that means is that they got a smart ass coach.
Yeah.
That's what that stat means. This is the Michael Phelps, or this is the Usain Bolt who runs the 964 100 meters at the World Championships or at the Olympics on the greatest stage. Because what they did to him for the past 10 weeks is they challenged him, and then before the event they gave him just the right number of days off. Then they brought him back and said, okay, now I know the supercompensation curve happened. I know that you don't trust me as an athlete, but I'm telling you it just happened. Let's go out there and run your fastest. And you get this unbelievable performance that's above and beyond. And that track and field you see it the most because it's just you and the earth doing performance testing essentially. But that's what compensation is, and that's what adaptation really is. And if you understand the system and how to challenge it properly, you can watch it in front of you, and it's really spectacular. It's some of the funnest things that we do, but it does take at least probably a 3-month window, a 2 to 3 month window, and then you see that over the course of a year, where you really see that kind of start to take shape. So,
well, and we see issues with that when it goes wrong. You go to the fitness community and the people, and you have a fitness person that's highly motivated, and they'll work out. Say they go from not working out at all to now working out 4 days a week. And in 3 weeks, they say, I feel the most fit ever. This is amazing. I am so addicted to this. I'm going to keep going. And around 5, maybe 4, maybe 5, maybe 6 weeks in, it's extremely predictable. We see soft tissue strains, tendon strains nonstop because they didn't adhere to that principle. It took an untrained person that couldn't handle 3 months of nonstop training like a professional athlete. They don't have that training history, so they train just a little too long. They fail to give themselves a deload week, a deload time period to allow themselves to compensate in a healthy way, adapt in a healthy way, and they injure themselves. We see it time and time again with structural strains, whether it's the muscle, the tendon, or they fail neurologically, which is even more sad because then their body might collapse and they hurt a joint. They get a ligament injury because they failed during the activity because they didn't allow themselves to super compensate it as you talk.
Right, and the failure there is that they tried to linearly progress somebody forever, and there's almost nobody in the world that could tolerate a linear progression forever. So in PT, we usually fail by not loading enough. So you might see this linear progression, but that's honestly because you didn't load them enough. You haven't actually loaded them to this point. And so then if you truly do load them to this point, the other problem we see, and more maybe on the fitness side of things, is you expect this linear progression out of somebody when that's just not physiologically possible.
Yeah. And they'll give you tons of markers. They'll tell you how the way they feel, maybe the day before or like right there on that day. Like you can either make the call in the moment, be like,
and
maybe
you'll
this
see
isn't
it.
a development day. This is a recovery day because we've been training for the last like 6 to 8 weeks. We kind of need to dial it back a little bit and let all the good stuff we just did take its place and then harness it in about a week.
And you'll see it in them too. So our pro baseball group in down in Sacramento right now is at about most of them, they're all slightly different spots here, but most of them are somewhere between that kind of 3, 4, 5, almost 6 week mark. And you can see the guys that are pushing more towards that 5, 6 week mark of this first phase of training. You can see them walking in a little bit more tired. Their Whoop band's giving them a little bit lower HRV score, like stuff starting to add up that it's about time for them to hit a little deload time. And so you can start to take some of these other things into consideration.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is the readiness score. All the wearables are doing it. Apple, Garmin, Whoop, the Oura Ring. I mean, it's now just going to be a snowball effect of understanding your heart rate data. All of it is just looking at what the rhythm of your heart rate is, not just your resting heart rate, but the variations between beat to beat. You can kind of get an idea of someone's adaptation or lack of adaptation to the stress supplied. We'd call that a difference between a sympathetic and a parasympathetic tone. But if they're not adapting well, they're stressing too much for their training history, soft tissue strain every day of the week. They'll get hurt. You'll get hurt. Don't do that.
I think that's a big challenge, right? I mean, you see it in the running community, you see it in the fitness community. It's like, hey, I don't want to give up a week. I'm going to get worse. Like I can't give up my gains. And it's like, you know what the reality is? The reality is if you took a week off and you didn't do anything, didn't do shit, come back, I bet you run faster. I bet you'll be better off next week than you were the prior week. And that's a lot of trust, I mean, we've seen that with athletes as well. When you're training an athlete, and I was training an athlete, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna make you feel really crappy, but then I'm gonna give you 10 days off and you'll be the best you've ever been. But you gotta trust me, this works, because they're going into it, they're like, this doesn't feel like the right thing. But like, understand this is how the body adapts, so you have to understand how it works. And when they do trust it and they see it happen once, they're like, damn, that was awesome. Like, let's do that more frequently.
But I think the problem with fitness people is that they've created a habit, right? So they've got this habit of exercising every day, and they're used to, I think somebody said they're addicted. You said they're addicted to that, right? They're addicted to this habit of doing something. So maybe it isn't like shut it down and do nothing. Maybe it's some light aerobic work, some like the mobility stuff, or modified other things. There's still stuff they can do, and so people still want to feel like they're getting better. Like, again, back to this pro baseball group, I can't tell them to go home for 7 days.
No.
They have to do something. So there's still things they can do to get better in this kind of deload period.
And as a therapist, I think we should shine right there. I mean, the regenerative, mobility-driven, low-level cardio days, or that should be what we're really, really good at.
Yes.
And you know, I know the fitness coaches, the strength coaches, they're masters at this game. But as therapists, we should own this regenerative side of things, and being able to balance that, I think, is tough. It's the yin yang of our world that we have to dance with.
Yeah. I think in regards to regenerative focus, it should still be specific, which then begs the question, what the fuck are we doing when it comes to foam rolling aimlessly before a workout? There's no specificity there. Like, you don't even understand what you're doing. You're just rolling around on this cylindrical object on the ground, like hitting your quads, your hams, your
It's
glutes.
because you're sore.
Well, then you shouldn't be going into a hard workout right after the end.
Maybe because you trained for 12 straight weeks. And never
Yeah,
took
maybe,
any
but let's
recovery
like take the tool and use it for maybe its purpose. You know,
Aaron's point is that they're missing the goal. They're not objective
missing
driven here.
the
They don't
goal.
understand what the goal
say,
is.
hey,
right?
coach, what am I doing today? What's the primary lift? Okay, I should open up these areas, or I should activate these areas. If I need to activate it, I'm going to foam roll fast, if that's going to be your tool of choice. If you're done with your workout, you should probably foam stay. I like to use that. Instead of rolling around, just lay your body on that thing and let the tension dissipate.
I mean, but
I'm
really, you need an
down. That's
intention.
good.
You know, if you are going to get on the foam roller or move around or do a foam stay, you need an intention. You should say like, oh, I can't touch my toes, but if I do my foam stay in my back or in my hammies, now I can touch my toes. And I know that was like that. We spoke of Coach Vince Minnie not that while back, and I when I used to work out with him on Saturday mornings, his body would require 20 minutes of foam rolling. He's like, Russ, I cannot do a squat without this. And he's an ex-NFL. His body's been through hell and back. So, you know, if you're built like Vince, you do probably have to bend some of those muscles. But most of us haven't fractured every bone in our body.
Yeah. So then but I get the youth athlete over here that's Gumby and like hasn't really put any tension to their body at all, and they're over there rolling on the foam roller like it's gonna do some magical thing to them. Like, dude, get off and start going to dynamic warm up.
You haven't earned your way to a foam stay. You haven't lived, son.
Like 2 decades older than you.
The point is, it's got to be objective driven.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to have a goal. If your goal is to decrease tone tissue, relax, get some more mobility, you need to foam stay.
Foam stay, baby.
If your goal is to activate and get things ramped up, you need to move quickly.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I think you'd be less pissed if it was objective
And
driven.
if they told me like, hey, what are you doing that for? Hey, coach, I'm doing it for my hinge
Down-regulating.
today. Down-regulating, making sure I'm going slow and deep. Don't worry, I'll do the fast stuff when I need to get active. I'm like,
Yeah.
Dialed.
So the take home message there for sure is that if we have tissue that's tight, tissue that's limited in range, then using long progressive holds, which the foam stay is a great way to think of
Love
that.
it.
Because foam rolling is misnamed, that you don't have to be rolling on the same back and forth. If you got tight tissue that's locked up or trigger points and such, get on there, lay on there, and let it relax. The research here supports 90 seconds plus of relaxation period.
And that's neural adaptation.
That's a minute and a half. And getting that
fast,
tissue,
baby.
Getting that tissue to let go.
Just bring it full circle.
Yeah, and then on the other end of the spectrum, be like, hey, like I'm getting ready for my workout. I want to get ramped up. You know, I took my C4 and I'm ready to go. And then now I'm gonna get in and I'm gonna do some
Bang.
I'm gonna do some oscillatory work. So maybe you use a Theragun or use some sort of vibration tool or use a foam roller and you do some quick rapid rolling. That's gonna have a more activation component where it's gonna wake your brain up, wake the nervous system up, and prep you for activity. So that's what we're talking about, and having some purpose behind your foam rolling event for sure. So
Isn't C4 illegal now, or no? Or is that one still out there? Or NO Explode is illegal. One of those things is not out there anymore, right?
yeah, they're all a little bit on edge for me. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I can't do any caffeine. Period. So that's
just smell ammonium next
I
time.
shouldn't
That's
do
fine.
it.
Yeah, it's
I don't need it.
That stuff's legit. I know. I saw some of the C4 the other day.
Huh.
Good luck.
I think it's amazing. Yeah, I don't condone it necessarily. Something that powerful, I don't know that can be good for you for prolonged use. I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Tangent.
Nonetheless, this is KIMEcast. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time. This was KIMEcast, and we are the KIME Human Performance Institute. Thank you very much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation with you. Please hop on our social media. It's at KIMEHPI and engage with us there. If you'd like us to feature a topic or answer any questions live on the show, post your comments there. You can also check us out on our website at KIMEperformance.com, and there you can see links to content that we've posted throughout our podcast for more information.